Hey everybody, how's it going? It's me, Logan Joyce, aka Suburban Yinzer. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and how these two men, Hamilton and Jefferson, helped establish the two-party system. Two different ideologies, two different perspectives, two different interpretations of our U.S. Constitution. And so, which side do I align with? Do I align with Hamilton or do I align with Thomas Jefferson? Now, let's not put the elephant in the room, but me personally, if you guys know me, you know that I am a huge Thomas Jefferson fan. I personally feel that as his second cousin 9 times removed and having inherited Jefferson bloodline in my DNA, I feel that Jefferson ideologically and with his principles and his political views and his interpretations of the Constitution, I feel that I identify more and agree with more of the Jeffersonian policies and the Jeffersonian interpretations rather than Hamilton. So this book right here called American Sphinx, The Character of Thomas Jefferson by Joseph J. Ellis is absolutely fantastic. If you want to dive deep more into Thomas Jefferson, I would suggest reading this very, very good book. This picture right here is Thomas Jefferson in 1791 when he was Secretary of State under George Washington in the Washington administration. And this picture right here, the bookmark, ironically, is Thomas Jefferson in 1801 when he became president during his first term as the third president of the United States. Now, what do I feel about Jefferson and Hamilton? Now, people in the modern day, in modern day America, interpret Hamiltonianism or Hamilton's character and the legend and the lore of Alexander Hamilton through the play Hamilton. And it's by no means a coincidence that the play Hamilton is that what it is it's an absolute glorification and just basically a sprinkled interpretation of delusion, in my opinion, on the character of Alexander Hamilton and the man that he was. Many times in history, especially ancient history, when I talk about ancient history, I'm talking about history that was 200 years ago, because in my opinion, we as Americans have no idea really who these men were. We know like the names, Thomas Jefferson, we know Alexander Hamilton, but we don't know the men. We don't know the ideologies. We don't know the morals, the values, the principles, the teachings, the education. We don't know anything. And so, personally, during that play, that Hamilton play, it basically depicted Alexander Hamilton as this glory boy and as this, basically this great, amazing American who established a system of this, who completely, radically made great positive changes to the United States of America. And in my personal opinion, as a Jeffersonian who believes in states' rights and limited government, federal government power, I feel that Alexander Hamilton completely messed up the American system. Hamilton was an absolute threat to the Republic. His influence and his political ideologies and his federalist, big government, central government interpretations were an absolute threat to the republicanism that Jefferson, my cousin, wanted to establish in the federal republic. So Jefferson came from a place of states' rights, of limited federal interpretation of the Constitution, meaning that the Constitution basically has strict powers, meaning that it has strict restraints onto federal authority, and whenever the authority isn't granted to the federal government in the Constitution, it's interpreted to the states. That means the states or the people basically acquire the power that the federal government is not allowed to acquire. It's pretty simple. And Jefferson was a big proponent and a fan of that ideology, because in my personal opinion, that's why you fight the American Revolution. You fight to basically remove the chains of federal superiority and big government tyranny, which anybody can agree that big government and a monarchical system of government, meaning that a tyrannical dictator, or in essence a uncontained empire, is not good. Okay, you have to have containment. You have to have strict boundaries among the federal central government, naturally. But Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, was coming from a place of wanting to increase the power of the federal government, basically wanting to grow the size of the federal government exponentially, and basically making it into an imperial state, meaning that Alexander Hamilton interpreted the Constitution as an ambiguous, ginormous undertaking, that the federal government must expand its powers, not by the strictness of the Constitution, but under, let's say, loose interpretations of the federal government's rule power, or rulings or powers, let's just say. Basically, what that means is that the federal government can do anything it wants. That the President of the United States, the federal power, can basically trump and triumph the states. That basically, whenever the federal government feels like doing something, it can just do it. That's called Hamiltonianism. That's exactly what Alexander Hamilton was about. He wanted George Washington to be labeled a king. He wanted him to be a monarch. Now, George Washington knew that this was delusional and he knew this was crazy, but because of Alexander Hamilton's seductive ways of hypnotizing Washington, because they fought together and served with each other in the American Revolution, Washington and Hamilton had a very special bond and camaraderie, a military-style camaraderie that Jefferson could never acquire with the first president, Washington. Now, during the cabinet meetings, as many Indians don't know, Jefferson was the Secretary of State and Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury. So during these cabinet meetings, Washington would mediate beside John Adams, the vice president. So as you can see, there's a lot of founding father big names into the first administration of the United States. But regardless, Alexander Hamilton was trying to push for a central bank. And to Jefferson, that was a nightmare. That would never fly in this constitutional republic or this new country, the United States of America. Because number one, the Constitution never permitted and never condoned a bank. And number two, what it did was it gave more power to the federal government. Basically, the federal government could then spend money whenever it wanted to. There was no restraints and no constraints around the federal government's spending powers, which just terrified Jefferson because he knew about the absolute abusings of power in the European nations. He knew about, especially the United Kingdom under King George III, he knew the rabbit hole you can go down when the federal government doesn't have those constraints and basically be able to spend as much money as it feels like, basically to achieve goals of superiority. Which, in my personal opinion, I feel that's absolute delusional, and I feel that's absolute craziness. Because why would you give your government unlimited powers? Basically, why would you want your government to have all of these powers and all this superiority over the states? Aren't the states, like, for example, Pennsylvania, don't these states, these 13 independent sovereign states, have rights? Don't they have individual specific rights that were granted under the 10th Amendment, basically saying that whatever powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people thereof? So basically, what Jefferson was trying to fight was, he was trying to say to Hamilton, you, in your administration, basically this Federalist administration, because that's basically what Washington, Adams, and Hamilton were basically seduced by, this federal superiority, which Jefferson was horrified by it because he saw the United States going down the lines of an empire. He saw Hamilton basically seducing Washington into establishing America as a federal empire, which in essence turned into the Federalist Party. And Thomas Jefferson, this is what he looked like at the time, he wanted to establish the Democratic Republican Party, or basically, it started out as the Anti-Federalist Party during the creation of the U.S. Constitution, but then evolved into the Democratic Republican Party, and it was nicknamed and shortened into the Republican Party during the 1790s, which they interpreted themselves as Republicans, which in essence they were. They believed in a republic, a constitutional republic. Now the Federalists, meaning Hamilton and Washington and Adams, they believed in basically federal superiority. They believed in basically limited rights for the states, but unlimited rights for the federal government, which, as we know, is absolutely crazy. In my opinion, I feel that it's nuts. So, Hamilton, being the Secretary of the Treasury, he wants America to go further into debt. He feels that debt is good. He feels that we should go into the global stage. We should basically acquire as much debt as we can and establish credit, which in essence we do know economically that is little common sense. I mean, I'm not saying that Hamilton was a totally bad guy. I'm not saying that he was malicious, but I'm saying that his interpretations and his morals and values and principles when it came to government were absolutely south. I feel that the viewpoints of Hamilton and the absolute outlook on Hamilton in the 2020s is so construed and so false that we see him as this glorious character or this glorious founding father of the American Revolution that we should just bow down to and not see any of the flaws, which there were so many flaws. And if you're a Jeffersonian like me, basically a Democratic Republican of the 1790s to 1800s, you can see the flaws and you can see the craziness. You can see the absolute specks of tyranny coming out of his rhetoric. And so when Jefferson and Hamilton were debating during the cabinet meetings, Jefferson always, no matter what, tried to stop Hamilton, tried to persuade Washington into establishing a constitutional republic, basically acquiring the states' rights, basically defending the states and limiting the federal powers and establishing a true constitutional republic, which we still are, but we were. But Hamilton, on the other hand, believed that Washington was King George I of America and wanted to establish a strong, superior federal government that triumphed over the states, which absolutely terrified Jefferson. And Jefferson didn't last long as Secretary of State because he was so sick and tired of Hamilton's manipulating tendencies under the Washington administration, so he dropped out and left. But Jefferson basically triumphed in the end because Hamilton was shot and killed by Aaron Burr, Jefferson's first administration's vice president. And so Hamilton did not last long, but even though the Jeffersonians triumphed in America for 3 administrations in a row, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, basically the Hamiltonian Federalist ideologies, the big government, big federal government ideologies spread throughout the country, which then merged into the Whig Party, which countered the Democrat Party, basically established by Andrew Jackson, which got many of its policies and many of its principles from my man Thomas Jefferson right here. So, in essence, what would I call myself in the 1800s? I would call myself a Democrat. Basically, what I am is I'm a Jacksonian Democrat, basically going into the Civil War and maybe a little bit post-Civil War into the Reconstruction era, because I feel that a strong, big, central federal government with no boundaries and no limitations, I feel that is a recipe for disaster and a precursor for absolute tyranny and also an empire. But absolutely, I absolutely feel that Jefferson was right, and I am Team Jefferson all the way. I'm a Jeffersonian to the day I die. And as for Hamilton and Hamiltonianism, I'm not a fan. Not at all. I like that he served in the United States or the Continental Army. I like his service to the country and basically helping establish the United States. But in essence, I'm not a big fan of him. So anyway, peace out. Have a good day.